Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a very informative one, I hope, because I am going to be going through every single one of my favorite makeup techniques that I like to do in order to make my makeup look as good as it could possibly look. I've definitely picked up a lot of different tips and tricks over the years, and I thought it would be a good idea to just compile them all into one video. So I really hope you guys are gonna enjoy, and let's just jump right into it. Okay, so the very first tip that I have for you guys is something that I stress in every single one of my videos, and it's definitely very self-explanatory, but I think that this is one of the most make or break steps in any makeup routine, and that is prepping your face with skincare right before you go in to apply your makeup. The difference between applying your makeup with freshly applied skincare versus no skincare at all, it's like night and day. Your makeup's just gonna sit so much nicer on the skin. It's going to last a lot better. It's not gonna settle as much. It's not gonna look as dry. So I'm gonna go in with my Belief the True Cream Aqua Bomb. One thing I will say is that not every single moisturizer will work well underneath makeup. And a lot of people say that if they apply moisturizer right before they apply their makeup, then their makeup tends to like ball up or pill or do, weird things that you don't want it to do. And some moisturizers will do that. Just depends on the ingredients and also the ingredients of your foundation and how they interact together. So I would just recommend not giving up on the technique. It's really just all about trial and error. I personally like to go for gel-based moisturizers underneath my makeup. I find that they kind of interact a lot less in a negative way with my foundations, and I just like things that are a little bit more lightweight but are still super moisturizing, and that's why I really like this Belief moisturizer. And I would also recommend really focusing that moisturizer on the areas of your face where you feel like you crease a lot or your makeup settles. So that could be on your smile lines, in between your brows. So my biggest goal when it comes to my base is that I want it to look as natural as possible. One of my favorite ways to achieve that is to do underpainting. So underpainting is the technique of using your bronzer and your blush underneath your foundation. So you're gonna put a layer of your bronzer and your blush, and then you're gonna put your foundation on top of that. And I like this technique for two different reasons. First of all, I do find that it looks a lot more natural because it actually looks like the color's coming from within your skin instead of sitting on top of it. Number two, I also find that I use a lot less foundation whenever I use this technique, which will in turn give me a much more lightweight look. And actually there's a third reason why I really like this technique. It's also kind of foolproof because you are applying your foundation on top. Even if you do like not a great job of applying your blush or your bronzer underneath, everything always just tends to work out and just blend itself. And even though it may feel like a bit of an extra step, it actually kind of saves you time. I'm gonna take my Say Sun Melt Natural Cream Bronzer. This one's in the shade Medium Bronze, and this actually brings me to another tip that I have for you guys. So whether you're doing underpainting or you're just applying your bronzer or your blush on top of your foundation, I also would recommend not applying the product directly from the pan to your face. This is not something that I always do. If you look back at my videos, you see me do this all the time, but you really will get a much more seamless effect when you apply the product first to the back of your hand and then use the back of your hand as kind of like your palette to then apply the product to your face. Number one, you're just gonna have so much more control with the product, and it will stop you from over applying it. I'm gonna take my brush, I'm gonna take my bronzer, I'm gonna dip my brush directly into the bronzer, dab it off on the back of my hand. If I had a stick bronzer, I would basically just draw the stick on the back of my hand and then pick it up with the brush. But because this is a pot, I'm doing it this way. Now you really wanna work the product into the brush. When the product is just sitting right at the top of the bristles, again, you might over apply it, and you can see that it applies so much lighter on the skin. Now with the underpainting technique, honestly, you kind of do want to apply a little bit more product than you would if you were applying it on top of your foundation, because you are going to be covering some of the product with the foundation. You do want it to obviously show through. But the same technique still applies. I'm just gonna build it up a little bit more. So I'm applying the bronzer on my cheekbones, on my temples. Bronzer has been applied. Now I'm gonna go in with my blush. So I'm gonna be using the Rare Beauty Liquid Blush. This is another product that really benefits from putting on the back of your hand rather than putting directly onto the face, because this is such a pigmented blush. And do the exact same thing. Take your brush, work it into the brush, and then go in to apply it. And I'm not swiping the product, I'm dabbing it on my cheeks. So now a tip that I have for foundation. If you want a very flawless looking base, but you really don't want your skin to look heavy or too overdone, my trick is to use a medium to full coverage foundation. This is my Kosas Revealer, but using a really small amount. Because by using a foundation that is more medium to full coverage, you're not gonna have to use a ton of it in order to actually get the result that you want. Whereas if you go with a light coverage foundation or even a skin tint, you're gonna have to really build things up quite a bit in order to get that like flawless effect that you want. So again, you're just gonna end up applying a lot more product than you might necessarily need. Whereas with a medium to full coverage foundation, you're not gonna have to use as much to get the desired effect. So I'm gonna take one pump of the foundation and I'm going to use a sponge. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm really going to work the foundation into the sponge. And I'm going to start by applying the foundation on the areas of my face where I don't have any color. So underneath my cheekbones and kind of like right beside my nose and my nose. And then I'm gonna go onto my cheeks where I did apply the blush and the bronzer. And by the time I get there, there's gonna be a lot less foundation on the sponge. And so it's gonna cover the bronzer and the blush a little bit, and it's gonna help blend everything and do all that good stuff, but it's not gonna cover it to an excess where you actually don't see it anymore. So now let's apply concealer. This is the Milk Future Fluid. So once again, I'm putting a bit of the concealer on the back of my hand, and I'm gonna be taking a small fluffy brush. This is the Spectrum Katie Jane Hughes 08 brush. And again, I'm gonna be working the concealer into the brush. So I'm just gonna pick up some of the concealer and then go to like a dry part of my hand that has no product and really work the product into the brush. Once it's really worked into the brush and you don't really feel like the concealer is necessarily like sitting right on top of the bristles, then I'm gonna go in and actually apply it to my under eyes. And this is gonna give me the most lightweight look to my concealer. Listen, I don't do this all the time. A lot of the times I will just take my concealer and just draw it on my face and blend it out. But when you do that, you will always use more product than you actually need. I think concealer is probably the one product that most people tend to over apply. You shouldn't need to apply like a crazy amount in order to get the coverage or brightness that you want. If you feel like you need to do that, then you probably just need to up the coverage of your concealer and use something that is a little bit more medium to full coverage. Honestly, it feels like I'm applying almost nothing to my face, but look at how much brighter this under eye looks. And I used such a small amount of product. Look at that. Creasing underneath the eye, I also find is a lot of the times due to applying a little bit too much product, because the excess product will just end up creasing underneath the eyes. A little bit of creasing is also pretty normal because we obviously all have moving skin underneath the eyes, and any type of moving skin anywhere on the face will attract a little bit of creasing. But applying as little product as possible is going to really help in just minimizing the creasing as much as possible. And I'm also gonna take whatever's left over my brush and just kind of like airbrush it on other areas of my face where I feel like I want just a little bit more brightness and more coverage. So on my chin, around my nose, I pretty much always put a little bit of concealer in this area because that's where I tend to get a little bit red. And sometimes when I underpaint, I do kind of want to add just a little bit more bronzer and a little bit more blush. Not a ton because then that defeats the purpose of underpainting, but just to kind of like amp it up just a little bit. So I'm gonna take my brush. This is actually a Rephr 04. It's one of my favorite bronzer brushes. You can see it's also really small. This is another little tip. Small fluffy brushes are key because they will give you the most control, and when they're super fluffy, they're really gonna help airbrush the product. You don't wanna use a brush that's too dense. For example, something like this, it's very, very, very dense, and this is going to give you really kind of harsh lines, and it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to blend things out. Whereas when things are nice and fluffy and you don't go in with too much pressure, like I'm talking barely even touching your skin, it will always look flawless. I'm gonna go back in with my bronzer, just a teeny tiny little amount. Again, tap off the excess on the back of my hand, really work in the product into the brush. I'm barely even touching my cheekbone right now, and I'm just kind of layering just a little bit more bronzer, barely even anything on the brush, but you can see it just amps it up just enough. And because the brush is nice and small, I'm really able to pinpoint exactly where I want the product to go. It's not going everywhere, and that's really the key. I'm even gonna put a little bit on my nose, just like that. Okay, now let's talk actually locking makeup in place. Obviously, powder is a great way to lock your makeup in, and I would always recommend using a little bit of powder, especially in the areas where you feel like crease a little bit. But at the same time, I like to avoid powder as much as possible because I do have dry skin, and I just find my skin always looks the best without any powder at all. So one of my favorite tips is to actually take a setting spray. This is the Rare Beauty setting spray and my sponge, and I'm going to spray the setting spray all over the sponge. And then I'm going to take my dampened setting sprayed sponge and just tap it all over my face. This is gonna do two things. It's really going to push the setting spray into the skin and help lock everything in. And it's also gonna give the makeup one last little blend to make everything look nice and flawless. Because you could obviously just spray the setting spray on your face and it's essentially gonna do the same thing, but this is just a nice way to kind of do two things at once. And I don't know if it's like a placebo effect or something, but I do find that by pressing the setting spray into the skin with the sponge, it does make a difference. And then after I press it into my face with the sponge, I'm just gonna also spray it on my face all over. And you'll notice that I'm doing this also before applying any of my eye makeup, because sometimes I find the setting spray will actually smudge my mascara. So obviously, to help to avoid that before you apply your mascara is key. Here's what my base is looking like after doing all of those little tips and techniques. Okay, now let's move on to some tips for the eyes. This is a tip that I have given you guys many, many times. It's one of my favorite things to do, and that's taking my cream bronzer again and taking a little brush. This is the Rephr 36 brush. It's actually my favorite brush to do this technique with. And you wanna take your bronzer and basically draw a line from the outer corner out towards your temple. And you could use a cream. You could also use a powder. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. I just find a cream gives a little bit more impact. I'm gonna take the same brush and just kind of buff along the edge so that it's nice and blended. This is one of my favorite ways to add some definition to the eye and to also give the eye kind of like an illusion of a lift without having to actually go in with eyeshadow. Because one thing about me is that I am very lazy when it comes to eyeshadow, and lately I just haven't been applying really any eyeshadow. This isn't really so much of a technique or even really much of a tip, but brown eyeliner is probably one of my most used things in my makeup collection because I pretty much transitioned almost completely away from using black eyeliner. I still love a black wing, but I just find brown, especially for everyday, is so much softer and so much easier and less intimidating when it comes to eyeliner. So this one over here is from Huda Beauty. It's the Very Brown Kohl eyeliner. Because this is a kohl pencil and not a liquid, it's so much more forgiving rather than using a liquid eyeliner. So the wing that I just made, you can see, doesn't even look that great. It looks very kind of jagged and a little bit rough. But now I'm gonna go in with just a little tiny brush and just smudge it out to create a nice soft looking wing. And this is just such a foolproof way to get a winged shape without really having to be very precise at all. Something else that I always do is I take my nail and I run it along the edge of the wing, and this will always sharpen things up and clean it up. And you could leave it like this, or you can actually use this as a guide to go in with your liquid eyeliner if you do want something a little bit more intense, because you'll actually be able to go in with a lot more confidence if you have something to just kind of trace over. I have another little tip for inner corner highlight. I always found that putting a shimmery, sparkly eyeshadow like right on the inner corner of my eye, right over here, was never the most flattering thing. And I always felt like it just didn't work on me until I realized that the placement just needed to be slightly adjusted. And I find that putting highlighter instead on the inner part of my crease, right over here, I find it gives such a gorgeous effect. It really opens up the eyes and gives you that really pretty glow that you can really see from straight on, because I always found that that inner corner highlighter was only really noticeable when you were looking from the side, but when you put it more on the inner part of the crease, you can actually see it when you're looking forward. So I'm just gonna take a sparkly eyeshadow. This is just from a random NARS palette, and I'm just going to apply it right on that inner part of the crease. You see that effect that it gives? It almost makes the lids look a little bit wet in a way. Another one of my favorite things to do for the eyes is to actually take your blush and to put it in the crease of the eye. Now, obviously this is a lot easier to do with a powder, and I would recommend using a powder over a cream, but you can still do it with the cream. I'm gonna take a fluffy brush and work the Rare Beauty blush into the brush. And this does work with the Rare Beauty blush because it is a little bit more on the matte side. It's not like super creamy, so it's not gonna move around. But I find that putting some blush into the crease of the eye will really pull everything together. It just kind of makes the look a little bit more cohesive, especially if you're not really applying much eyeshadow anyway. This is just a really nice and easy way to use the same product on two parts of the face. Always these small little details that will really pull things together. Okay, now I'm gonna apply some mascara. This is my Tower 28 Make Waves. And something that I pretty much do on the regular is get mascara on my eyelids. I feel like it's my signature. But I don't stress out about it because I do have a tip to actually get the mascara off without ruining your eyeshadow if you do have eyeshadow on underneath, because the absolute worst thing is when you spend like an hour doing your eyeshadow and then you just get mascara all over it. So you can see I have mascara all over my lid right now. I'm just gonna forget about it for a couple minutes and then we're gonna come back to it. I'm gonna show you how I get rid of it. In the meantime, while I do let that dry, I'm going to give you a little brow tip. So I always like to apply my brow gel before I go in with either my brow pencil, brow powder, brow pen, whatever it is. Brow gel always comes first. And the reason why I do this is because I find it makes it so much easier to actually know where I want to apply my pencil or my powder, whatever it is that I'm using to fill in my brows. Because my brows are already kind of placed where they need to be with the brow gel, it just makes filling them in so much easier. So I'm just taking my brow pen from Glossier and I'm just kind of filling it in. Because I just brush my brow hairs through, it's really easy for me to see exactly where I need to fill things in. The sun is currently reflecting off of a car into my face, so hence the very, very harsh lighting right now. I'm going to show you now how to remove the mascara off the lid. So I'm taking a clean spoolie and I'm very, very gently just going to scrape off the mascara, and it should completely go away. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world. It doesn't feel great, but this is really the only way that I've discovered to remove mascara without completely ruining your eyeshadow, if you do have eyeshadow underneath. That lighting though, I had to find a place where the light wasn't hitting me directly in the face. So we are almost done. The last tip that I have for you guys is concerning the lips. So I just wanted to show you guys how I personally like to create a fuller, powderier looking lip that doesn't look too overlined. So I actually like to go in with a pretty dark lip liner, which might sound counterproductive to what I'm trying to accomplish, but just bear with me. This is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude Lip Crayon in the shade Luna, and I'm going to line my lips as I normally would. Looks crazy for now, but that's okay. Then I'm gonna take a clean brush and really blend out this color. Then I take my sponge or whatever I use to apply my foundation and I just lightly go over the lip, and it essentially leaves me with like a contoured lip, but it doesn't leave me with any lines, which is what I'm looking for. So you see, you don't see any lines anywhere, but my lips look noticeably fuller than they did like 2 seconds ago. And so now that my lips are nicely contoured, you can go in with any lip product that you want. I'm just gonna go in with a little bit of a lip stain. This is the Fenty lip stain in my type. So I'm just putting a couple dots, rubbing the lips together and really working it into the lips just to give the lips a little bit of color. But because it's a stain, it's really gonna look very natural and not too intense. And that is how I like to get a very, very, very natural but still very plump look to my lips. And if you feel like things got a little bit messy, you could always put a little bit of concealer around the lips. So guys, that is it for all of my tips. I really hope that you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a part 2 to this. I feel like I can do something like this perhaps with non-makeup related tips, and hit the thumbs up button if you did enjoy, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.